It is my immense pleasure to welcome you to the 2023 edition of the Transformation Literacy Conference. My name is Dominic Stucker, Managing Partner with Collective Leadership Institute. We're here today as part of what got kicked off last Friday in Potsdam in person. This series will be today, continues on Wednesday and into Friday, and we'll provide more information about that shortly. So why a Transformation Literacy Conference? I think all of us who join a conference like this are aware that human activity is exceeding planetary boundaries. In fact, we're threatening the life support systems on planet Earth, whether that's food or water, energy systems, and also social services, democracy, justice, and peace. You'll notice a link in the text chat to a recent report from the Club of Rome called Earth for All that makes a very strong and clear case about the turnarounds that are needed for a sustainable and regenerative future. It's still possible, but we need to take action now. Our conference sessions, and I'd like to share a few my screen with you here at this time. Our conference sessions are going to focus on our transformation enablers. So we have two enablers for today and also for Wednesday and Friday. The two transformation enablers that are in focus today are enlivening narratives and empowering metrics. On Wednesday, we'll be looking at life-enhancing innovations as well as guiding regulations. And on Friday, enabling structures and multi-stakeholder governance. The cross-cutting theme for the conference is on governance and on democracy. So how can we build societies that are based on inclusive democracy and on good governance? These transformation enablers that you see here are meant to be entry points for transformation, whether we're talking about compelling stories and things that we deeply care about, that we're deeply caring about and measuring in terms of empowering metrics. That'll be the focus today, and my colleague Elizabeth is going to go into more detail on that. As we get settled in, I'd like to share the overall goals for the conference. We have an incredible lineup of speakers for you today, and we'll be celebrating and learning from these speakers. They're transformation practitioners, they're partners, funders, and academics. And we'll have a chance to make sure the conference is also interactive. So looking at entrenched challenges and possible solutions based on what our speakers are sharing with us. And overall, this is an annual conference series, and we seek to enliven a community for leading transformative change collectively. At the Collective Leadership Institute, we feel that the challenges we face are a level of urgency and complexity that they require a diverse set of stakeholders around the table in order to address them. Our norms. So we're inviting you into a conference where we want to create a respectful space. So we ask that all of us, we should all please embody respect in our interactions and also patience with any technical glitches. I think you're already showing me a little patience now. Express our views clearly and concisely, and listen with an attitude of seeking to understand. And related to this one, we're trying to suspend our own judgments and remain open to others' perspectives. Before we go any further, in a moment, my colleague Elizabeth will be going more deeply into enlivening narratives and empowering metrics. I'd like us to see who's in the room, starting with my co-moderators. I'm here with Douglas Williamson, who's calling in from New York City, and Elizabeth Kuhn, who's calling in from Potsdam in Germany. Welcome to say a word of greeting to our participants.
Hi, everyone. I think we've met already most in the welcome session. For those of you who are just joining, it's great to have you here with us, and we're looking to a really fruitful and interesting session together today, Wednesday, and also on Friday. Elizabeth, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, thank you. Yes, also warm welcome from my side. Very happy to see you all here, and I'm really looking forward to to the beautiful inputs from our speakers, to the conversations, and most of all also to your insights. What solutions, what ways forward do you see to learn also from these stories that we're sharing and that we're bringing together? So back to Dominic.
All right, thank you. We'd like to have a sense of who is in the room with us. I see 55 participants have called in. And so, Martin, if you could kindly add the link to our poll, I'll share the results here momentarily. This Slido poll will ask you about the country you're calling in from. We are also asking about which sector you work in and which sustainable development goal topics do you focus on or care most about. So please go ahead and click on the link there. And I'll pull up my screen and display the results as they start coming in. All right, I'm seeing the results already. Thanks for responding. I see at least 20 of you in the poll right now. And I'm going to be sharing the results here. Oh, wow, from around the world. All right, as people are completing the poll, we have at least another 9 participants who are filling out the poll. We can already see some of these countries coming in. I see countries across Africa, across Europe. I see that the United States is there. There we go. Looks like one more person is responding. So quite a few people from Germany, indicated by the fact that Germany's written a bit larger. Also from South Africa and Kenya, we have high numbers of participants. And then from Mexico and the United States, in the Americas, I know that we also have someone here from Brazil as one of our speakers. So welcome to all of you. Please continue to complete the poll. I'll move on to the next area. So here, interestingly, wow. So 50% of us, a little over 50% of us are from civil society, and we have equal shares of public sector, private sector, academia, as well as other sectors, and media is represented as well. Thank you. I'm glad for that diversity. And finally, we asked you about which sustainable development goals you care most deeply about or that you're focused on. Some of the highest responses here are around climate action and partnerships for the goals, as well as quality education, gender equality, peace, justice, and strong institutions. We have good health and well-being, life below water, no poverty. It's the whole range. Thank you for the work that you're doing in these areas. Stop sharing my screen at this time. We're very excited to be able to convene this conference on an annual basis and really glad for the diversity of participants that are here. We're going to go into more depth at this time on the 2 transformation enablers that are our focus today. So I'm going to invite my colleague, Elizabeth Kuhn, back onto the stage for an input. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Dominic. And yes, I wanted to talk just a little bit about this topic of narratives and metrics that we have today, because they're guiding our conversations and exchanges, and they're just part of a set of strategic elements that drive transformation, and we simply call them transformation enablers. And so when we look actually at narratives as one part of the topic and theme of today, in general, narratives contains all the stories and the worldviews that we bring forward, like Dominic also mentioned already. But it includes also what I would say is a particular understanding of how the world works and what people should do. So it highlights and describes what we see as a problem, what the consequences are of this problem, and also what we should do about it. And when we are talking about enlivening narratives as really a driver, a strategic driver for bringing forward transformation, what has shown good in practice is essentially elements like considering that we have a balance of narratives between, let's say, narratives of threat and narratives of possibility. So, for example, there's a lot of information and messaging around current and future danger that we need to prevent. So I think one of the most famous ones is simply the phrasing climate emergency or climate crisis, which is, of course, important. But we also need those narratives that encourage us to see possibilities, so such as those embedded in new economic approaches. And I'm really looking forward. We'll have an input later today also around a blue economy approach. And that is one of the examples for a more future-oriented narrative. What we would also need, or what is also important here for enlivening narratives, are, let's say, any kind of narrative or story thread woven in here that conveys the leave no one behind message in co-creating this future. Quite simply, if the narratives that we are conveying or that we're trying to convey only offer scenarios for a livable future for parts of societies, then resistance is guaranteed. And in any case, it will not be sustainable since it fails to address huge social exploitation and inequalities that are part of our sustainability challenge in the first place. And we also need to make tangible in really good narratives, how can we achieve this? So making these steps visible and also possible for all. So narratives go beyond visionary elements. They also show us how to achieve them and how everybody can and or needs to contribute to achieving this. And this would refer, for example, to things like strategic roadmaps and also helping sort of small and large initiatives connect to a larger overall vision, be it for the country or for a region that we're living in. And so this in general is a good guidance when we're trying to think about what are narratives that really support us in bringing forward transformation for sustainability. Now, if we take up the, let's say, special lenses for this annual session of our conference, which is democracy and governance, and say, all right, how can this be particularly focused to this topic? Then what this contains, for example, is thinking about narratives that develop alternatives to essentially the might is right narrative that is very strong. So people who have power are able to do what they want because no one can stop them. And that's a sometimes explicit, but a lot of times very implicit narrative, and of course also the lived reality of a lot of us in the world. And it's a narrative that we also actively need to counter if we want to move towards better governance and better democracy. And so one example here could really be to weave rights-based approaches more in the narratives that we're using in our initiatives and spotlighting accountability structures that we want to bring forward or that we're using. Likewise, another element here could be that we're also making sure that the governance structures that we're using really empower all concerned and support self-organization in contributing to this narrative, and that we're really creating spaces for very concrete and very tangible, experienceable action for really bringing this forward. So let's say, how can the local civil society organization around the corner become active, just as regional political governance bodies such as, say, African Union or European Union. So all of these elements are really important when we say we want to make sure the narratives we use make an active contribution to more democracy and better governance. Now, if we look at second element of today's conversation is metrics. And I mean, metrics in general, they go beyond indicators that describe a problem or progress, because behind indicators is also a form of describing a situation. So I think if we take GDP, it's very contentious already since decades, because essentially it embodies the description of what constitutes economic well-being that has widely been proven inadequate for actually fostering well-being for a lot of people. And so what we talk about when we say empowering metrics really refers to elements such as making sure that progress is really visible. It alerts to danger or to progress, but it's also really relevant. So making sure that the visibility around it also shows that that it measures the relevant factors where there is a collective consensus around this is what is important to measure. And also that this visibility strengthens the awareness about where we are going in both ways, hopefully in a positive way, but yeah, definitely in both ways. Second really important element is that we have data that is actually understandable, one that is inspiring and practical. So again, it needs to foster sort of being able to look into the future and showing ways how we as an individual, but more importantly also how we as different group of people can actually contribute to making this measurement better in the future whenever it is measured next time. Because only then they really are empowering and they're helpful as a tool of really bringing us forward. And finally, if sort of third element that is equally important for this driver here is also that we have a good balance between different kind of indicators. I think there's been a good development in the last couple of years to really say, all right, we need a lot of objective criteria like hard facts and data, but we also need much more subjective criteria and measurement sets, even though that comes with much more effort in actually collecting the data and also then analyzing it. But having this diversity here as well in indicator systems and in measurement systems makes sure that we are really getting the best possible picture of what we want to measure. And so if we look at this through democracy and governance lens, really important elements around metrics here could be to say, right, let's use a variety of forms of progress reporting. So making sure that this is relevant also for the democratic narratives that we want to bring forward. Make this data accessible and supportive for a diversity of stakeholder groups. So if I'm thinking about, more than half of us here in this room are from civil society, then you know how important it is that the progress measurement that we're making as a community is accessible not only to, let's say, political decision makers or those with high influence, but also different kind of civil society organizations and forums and networks that then there can also be sort of collective sense making and a certain kind of movement or pressure or visibility arising out of that. And finally, again, an important element for metrics in this context is also to say there are a variety of indicators, a variety of metrics and measurement systems for sustainability actually out there. So many that people have actually complained that it's hard to even choose which one you want to do. But the important part is no matter which one you actually choose from those that are already existing or you develop your own ones, is that it gets adapted really to the particular context it refers to. So let's say there are many different ways of lived democracy and good governance around the world. And having this collective process of translating it to what that means in different communities around the world makes sure there is a shared understanding. And through that shared understanding, also shared contribution can actually come up. And so maybe you've heard it already a little bit. There is a key connection between narratives and metrics, because metrics, they visualize the progress or alert to danger, both of which are important if we're pursuing particular visions or particular goals behind that contribute to a larger future narrative, sustainability narrative. And so metrics can really contribute to different kind of narratives it's either control or enablement. So let's say in metrics, it can promote the idea that we need to control, plan, and manage every detail of initiatives. That then, however, prevents them from taking on an ecosystem quality, which we need in order for them to be truly sustainable. And so if we use different metrics, we always need to look out, are they contributing to a threat narrative or an empowerment narrative? So it's really interesting to look at, let's say, CO2 emission measurements, ecological footprint narratives, and metrics, and think about what kind of understanding of the world, what kind of perspective is behind there. What is the narrative embodied here? And so with that, just a little bit of a framing about sort of the strategic topics that guide our conversation today. And I'm handing it back to Dominic because now comes the important part about our experiences and the experience of the speakers on how to really bring this forward practically in the world.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that input on narratives and metrics. Indeed, we will go now into more practical depth. We have speakers with us today from our network who are funders, who are practitioners, who are partners of ours. As you can see on the screen, we have Maria Amália Souza from Brazil, Gwendolyn Van Sant is with us from the United States, and Carol Mutiso and Doreen Semuyu, both from Kenya. I'll be introducing them each individually as we move into their presentations. We'll have presentations of about 10 or 12 minutes each, followed by question and answer. For your questions, you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A icon. If you could kindly include your questions there. I'll be looking for questions that are clarifying, that are deepening, that are exploratory of the topics that we hear today. So I'd like to introduce Maria Amália. She's coming to us from Brazil. She's showing us a little bit of Brazil behind her there. Amália is the founder and strategic development director of CASA, the Socio-Environmental Fund. She's going to tell us more about CASA, specifically through an input on directly financing community-based organizations, on CASA's approach for using metrics to tell stories of impact, not only in Brazil, but also beyond. Amália, it's an immense pleasure to have you with us. And I'll share your slides for you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Sorry for the brightness in the back, but it's very cold, although I'm in Brazil. It's a freezing day over here. So I had to look for some warmth. Well, let me start a little bit by talking about CASA Fund. We are what we call a movement-led fund. We were founded by environmental leaders from South America who, for decades, noticed that the work to conserve our important biomes across the region, which are all cross-border biomes. That's why we're right away speaking of South America. We were trying to understand philanthropy in the world and saw how much it was concentrated in the hands of northern institutions, in the conservation field even more. A very, handful of very, very large international NGOs pretty much still get the huge majority of the resources, the funding that goes into the field and have, important work. But what we saw missing was that now it's already more spoken than before, but the people who really have protected these important biomes that are climate regulating biomes in this planet are the people who live in these places, right? The indigenous peoples, the traditional communities, the original people of this territory who have been doing this and whose lessons we have kind of denied for a very long time. So we decided that we had to figure out how to get resources in scale, large in amounts, that we could land into our region and distribute and do the outscaling, as we call. So make sure that we fund as many communities and that these communities interconnectedly increase the impact. That idea, of course, comes from the systems dynamics, which I had the opportunity to learn. That's where we met, and I met Dominique. But actually, what we use systems dynamics specifically. We designed our systems to in the systems dynamics thinking, the systems thinking approach, which is you need to belong to these systems so that you can quickly figure out what the problems are, what the challenges are, and act. So it's the quick feedback loop, is that we call. We also, belonging to these systems, we can identify the leverage points where you turn a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle, which is, so all of this we had to invent because systems in the philanthropic world didn't exist to do exactly that. And so we work across wide networks. Yeah, you can move the slides too. And the next slides are actually just showing you images of these people, of the kinds of approaches that we have had. So it's multifaceted approach. You have to, stop the fires, which I'm sure you've heard how serious it is and how destructive it is. And the fire, our origin of these fires usually are criminal, and only in communities who are locals are the ones who can detect the small fire before it actually gets into a huge disaster. These women are indigenous women. This is the first women's community brigade of Brazil. And then you can see the quilombola, the Black traditional communities, the production. So we actually have different approaches. So next one, you can get some other ideas of our images. It takes a little while to move. The fishing communities, the traditional fishing communities. And here you can see we are actually discussing the impact of renewable energy, which is very necessary, but socially speaking, there are some mistakes being made as well that are affecting communities and wildlife in these regions. So, so what I'm saying is systems are complex. And if you understand how they work, you need to be ready and quickly be able to place resources in ways that they can empower the voices of these people who are the protagonists, who have the answers to the protection of our planet. Next one. So what I'm saying in general is mostly what we do is two kinds of approaches. It's sustainable solutions, which can be very diverse. In the forest, you have cities, you have peripheries, you have rivers, you have forests, you have, nut gatherers and fruit gatherers. You have the indigenous cultural communities that are being threatened and that whose livelihoods are actually the what we need to protect these places. Next one. So how do you actually explain this complexity of approach? What we designed a system that was from the need to the structure. And we had been doing this for a while, and it's very hard to tell the story. It's very confusing when people, we don't even use the terms small grants anymore because immediately people connect to irrelevant. Small grants are irrelevant. You have to put a lot of money, millions, if you want to solve some complex problems. We need millions, but in another way, it needs to be spread. It needs to be spread into the hands of communities who have been doing this work alone forever, who only have their own lives to defend these places. We need to distribute it in a way that they can do their work better. So this is some of the reasons we began to actually use the metrics to tell this powerful story, because now we have numbers. We have a video in the expo session. There's some information and some materials that we have been developing. So we've been tracking indicators and information. We have actually been engaging our communities, our grantees. CASA's made maybe, it's over 3,000 grants in the last 18 years across 10 countries in South America. And then in the beginning, it was very hard to actually produce clear information about impact. Now we actually have those numbers. We have a very robust and detailed database where we actually can map the real demand, map the things we are being able to respond to, what we're missing. And you can see the categories here. Indigenous peoples right now are the key to a lot of the answers that we need for climate change. So our grant making is very big in this category. And you have activists and networks, groups working together. You have family farmers. Quilombolas are the Black runaway slaves from the African Americans who had to protect themselves, and now they're recognized as traditional communities. You have environmental defenders, and that's grown quite a bit. And we had to invent a program. I actually had to create a program very quickly because of the violence against defenders. And you have fishing, so extractivists here mean not the predators, but the communities actually for forest dwellers who live from the forest. Well, one of the answers, so the next one and the last, one of the answers that we have been able to learn along these years is that the closer you are to the community, the closer resources are in their own currency, in their native languages, within their cultural framework, the better you can respond. So CASA, who was the South American Fund, decided that we needed to share our model with others across the world. Mostly we began with South America. And in the last 6 years, we actually helped to create like-minded independent funds in Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, Mozambique. And we already had in our network 4 older funds, Samdana Institute in Southeast Asia, Tierra Viva in Central America, PASOL in Mexico, and CASA were the longer standing funds, but we were too few. So suddenly now that we actually have working funds in the Global South, we created this alliance, Socio-Environmental Funds of the Global South. And all of this is our tentative approach to actually using the numbers and using the power of narrative that we are drawing from mapping everything that we're doing. We are now beginning a joint program funded by CLUA, the Climate and Land Use Alliance, one of their programs, Forest Peoples and Climate, where we're going to actually be tracking all of it's tracking evidence more than impact. It's actually being able to demonstrate that our approach really works, that it actually produces what we have been seeking forever. It actually protects forests, protects important biomes, because it's the people, and that's where democracy comes in, right? It is strengthening the fabric of democracy when you actually enable these excluded and vulnerable and invisible communities to philanthropy, most of all, but to society, to actually engage and then show us what they know and what they can do to protect their forests. One of our, just the last thing I'm going to say, one of the things we shared well, actually, we're hoping to share, but you can find, I don't know if we were able to share the link. I can put it here. It is a video. CASA in the last 4 years funded more than 500 indigenous associations directly in half of the existing Brazilian ethnicities. Brazil has 305 ethnicities recognized right now. We funded more than half in 4 years with more than 500 grants directly. So it's not somebody doing it for them. That's the whole point. It's how do you offer the tools so that they can understand the mechanisms of thinking of a proposal, of managing their resources themselves and executing their solutions. And once you do that, the learning curve is absurd. I mean, it's like one time and people say, wow, I'm not alone anymore. And I'm seeing how interconnected all of these grants are. So it's about acupuncture. That's more of the image. It's how do you actually stimulate simultaneously as many places and processes and public and stakeholders as we can. And I dare to say, this is the only way we're going to protect these important places like our forests in the world. There is no other solution. And the sooner we understand that, the better. And that's exactly why measuring and telling stories that are based in numbers. In the video I was mentioning, we just take 59 grants that we made in partnership with Gordon Moore Foundation. So it's not the 500, it's 59. And they tell their own stories about how they've been protecting their territories, the tools, the drones, the GPSs, the boats, how they were able to access. And the result was in 59 project only, in the Amazon, the Brazilian Amazon, 63 million hectares of forest were protected. So just take that 10-fold, just in Brazil and then across the basin with local resources reaching the communities directly. What kind of impact that can make in our, in our planet and our chance to continue living here. So, thank you. I hope I didn't go way beyond, but I think that's the message I wanted to share. I'm going to put here the link of the publication. Well, our publications in general, and then you can find how we measure. All right.
Amália, thanks so much for that incredible presentation. I think you've really kicked off the conference in a really special way for us. Thanks for the personal reminder of our time together in the Donella Meadows Fellows Program. Much of the systems thinking we learned there clearly comes through. You're talking about CASA as a movement-driven fund. You're talking about interconnection of grants. You're talking about scaling. You're talking about funding communities directly, really respecting communities to the extent that we say, you know best what to do with these resources. Quite simply, that came across very clearly to me. And some of the numbers that you're mentioning, 3,000 grants across all of 10 South American countries, having funded directly half of the 305 ethnicities in Brazil, is really incredible. And so much land that's been protected, as well as the protectors of that land being protected. Amália, I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that are coming in. And I see quite a few here in the Q&A. I believe that's also visible to you if you care to click on the icon on the bottom of your screen. So a couple of the first questions that came through from Sarita were related in a way. So protecting also the lives of researchers who are conducting the research and trying to demonstrate the impact, measure the impact that you're talking about. How do we help protect those researchers who, related to that second question, are trying to ensure transparency in the work that we do? Perhaps you'd be willing to respond to that question.
Sure. Yeah, I'm reading the others here
Yeah.
too. Administrative authenticity. And the schools,
Mhm.
and well, that's the multi-approach thing. It's not for us. We don't decide what we fund. It's the communities that make the demand. So the way we actually respond to that demand is by, once we have secured resources, of course, they come earmarked by big funders. It's very difficult that they understand how everything's connected. But once we have a general region or public that they are willing to support through us, then we actually make direct consultations. So it could be anything. It could be educational systems. It could be seedling programs. It could be reforestation. It could be urban peripheries, figuring out how to use bicycles safely with, so apps. There's everything. I mean, it's an enormous number of different approaches. And so it's all about authenticity. It's about what they really need. And that's exactly, it's easy to say, oh, I'm inclusive, oh, participatory grant making, but you're actually taking the system that was designed vertically and you're trying to flatten it. But it's not so simple. What we did was actually create a horizontal system. So there's nothing that we fund that doesn't come as a demand directly from the communities. And the way that we do is that we spread, we say, okay, we got some money for this. What do you really need? And so we do wide consultations. And that's how we create the call for proposal based on what we heard. So it's about listening and it's about translating it into a call. So it's not up to us to say what they need to do. So we don't put them in small boxes and say, oh, we can fund this, but we can't fund that. So none of that is part of our reality. So it is about authenticity. I don't know if I answered, sorry.
Well, I think you responded to a number of questions.
Yeah.
For
And
example,
researchers and anybody, environmental defenders come in very, in different forms and shapes. They're not just the leaders, they are definitely the supporters. We have, so all of them are included in how we try to call attention to this, to some of these problems. Because besides making the grants, a lot of the numbers, a lot of the metrics, a lot of the way we use the narratives is to educate the field. So they understand that everything is connected and that truly there is a way to make resources get to the hands, directly to the hands of the most impacted communities in a way that they actually can be the protagonist, that not somebody has to go do it for them because for them, they don't know how to they don't know how to manage money. That's not true. This is more than proved. And that's, I guess, what our metrics demonstrate the most evidence that these people can do. They can execute and they can actually, they send us reports. We have a simple but very, very careful way of engaging, of making sure that they know we are only the channel, that the important work is theirs. It's not about the money. It's about the money getting in the right hands.
Thank you for that trust in communities. That we often look to communities as passive beneficiaries somehow that need all kinds of capacity building. Sometimes it's in fact the other way around, that we have a lot to learn from communities in terms of the realities that they see on the ground, the aspirations that they bring, the experience they bring. Amália, we have about 30 to 45 seconds left here. Your last slide was about a movement in the global south around fundamentally shifting how funding works. Can you tell us, 30 to 45 seconds, what is your vision for that alliance?
Well, it's actually to demonstrate strongly to the north. No, well, let's backtrack. There is a lot of resources being created, new resources even, talking about climate that they need to get to forest protectors and in order for us to control the climate change. And there's a lot of talk, but they don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And actually, the role of this alliance is to demonstrate that we already know how to do it, that things are happening already for 20 years, that they just need to look at us, and not just us, our own funds, the ones that are members of the alliance, but there's a lot of infrastructure in our countries. There's a lot of amazing work, and everybody can, we can and must lend a lot more resources directly into the hands of local actors that are capable, that have already demonstrated more than enough evidence of our ability to manage resources. Because usually they just keep staying in the same place. They go around and around. But we have seen for the last 30 years the concentration of large amounts of resources in the international, in the hands of international conservation groups. And I'm not saying they don't do anything. Of course, there's a role for them, but it's not enough. It's not enough. They cannot deliver the protection of our big forests. The only ones who can deliver are the people who live in it, because that's they're the ones who have been doing it. So that's our purpose for the alliance, is to actually create the narrative and demonstrate that there are mechanisms that you can trust and that can lend resources carefully to produce results, real results. It's not just about a bunch of, I heard confetti effect the other day. That's why I don't use small grants. It's not about small. It's about the appropriate amount that meets communities where they are, so they can get a handle of how this process works. And from then on, they fly. They really do.
Thank you. Amália, your insight and passion is really clear. Thank you for this input into our conference. And I see one of those virtuous cycles that you mentioned between narratives and metrics, that the stories we tell can be strengthened by the metrics in a virtuous cycle that can lead toward greater sustainability, toward transformation. I'm going to shift, please stick around for the panel. I'm going to shift to our next speaker. I can navigate away here. And the next person that I get to welcome is Gwendolyn von Sand. And Gwendolyn, I'm just going to pull up our slides here so that we can give you a proper welcome. There they are. All right. So Gwendolyn and I know one another from a time a couple of years ago when I lived and really grew up in Western Massachusetts in the United States. Gwendolyn is the CEO and founding executive director of an organization called Multicultural Bridge. And my wife and also my twin sons and I had a chance to volunteer at Multicultural Bridge and support the incredible work that Gwendolyn and her team are doing. The presentation, the input that Gwendolyn would make for us today is on narratives and metrics to counter systems of oppression and move toward inclusive democracy for all. Gwendolyn, I am excited to give you the floor, and I'll move through the slides as you wish here.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dominic, for inviting me to this platform. I'm really excited to be speaking to people across the globe and sharing our story from the Berkshires and Western Mass. As Dominic said, I'll be talking about narratives and metrics. I'm very inspired by Amália's presentation, and I actually feel like it really supports some of the work I'll talk about today. I want to just speak a little bit about where I am in the US. I'm in New England. I live in a predominantly white community. I am an African-American woman. Things that are really important to me about our area are these two photos that are in this slide. Just this last August, we erected a statue of Elizabeth Freeman. She was an enslaved woman, and she sued for her freedom in 1781. That was many, many years before the Emancipation Proclamation was passed in 1863. And we just now are celebrating her in our home community. So to me, this is one of the narratives that I'm working on, is repairing history and restoring the legacy of our people. The other one is Dr. W.B. Du Bois. And on a global scale, Dr. Du Bois is recognized as a sociologist. He's the first African-American to graduate from Harvard. He started the NAACP in our country. He really he's just a grandfather of Pan-African civil rights. And again, in our community is not embraced. He chose to leave the US and spend the end of his life in Ghana because of being rejected by the US and seeing the oppressive systems in our country. And I am the vice chair of the town's legacy committee of re-embracing Dr. Du Bois and uplifting his work in his hometown. So when I was asked to speak about narratives, these two pieces speak to me because now a banner hangs on our main street, hailing Dr. Du Bois and the values that he held up. And there's a new statue for Elizabeth Freeman. So when I think about narrative and shifting narrative, repairing our history is really important. So the next slide. The mission and vision of Bridge has been about promoting mutual respect and understanding. We are a women-led organization, and I am the co-founder. And at this stage, we're also recognized federally as a culturally specific organization, meaning we've been led by communities of color and serve communities of color. We're dedicated to catalyzing change and integration, and we do it through a gender, race, and equity lens. And we also practice trauma-informed and positive psych work. And you can see our core values. Next slide. I just wanted to represent some photos of our work and talk to you a little bit about what transformational change looks like in our organization. We consider ourselves sort of a 360-degree solution. So the first place I'll talk about is youth leadership. We really believe in cultivating the leaders of our future. And in our area, again, bringing kids that are marginalized together in community to activate and to give their input on their experience, but also solutions. The activity that Dominic mentioned that his twin sons participated in, we had our youth leaders there as well. And that conversation was focused on climate resilience and climate action. And Bridge's work was to bring the voices that are never included in that conversation to the table. And then other community allies joined us in that conversation. So there's some pictures here representing our youth from age 5 to 24. And then if we flash forward to the pandemic, we have had, I'm still on that slide though. We developed a food access and food sovereignty program out of that program that Dominic participated in on the climate action and resilience. One of the things we heard from the constituents was we need access to land. We need access to provide for our communities. So that was one of the barriers that Bridge began to work on. And we've developed a food sovereignty and empowerment program. And if we flash forward 3 years from delivering food to people that were vulnerable and making sure that they had all of the health resources that they needed, we are now this year opening up a solidarity meeting house and kitchen and a temporary housing shelter, all culturally specific. So like Amália said, the solutions are coming from community. We are listening and being the conduit for those solutions and finding the resources to build. So I'm very excited to show you a picture on below of the beginning of our solidarity farm and garden, where we have at this point 14.5 acres donated to us to begin farming, business, and entrepreneurial efforts for these community leaders that joined our climate conversations, and they're telling the rest of their community. And the last piece I want to talk about is this public health being very important to us. And there's a documentary called The Mosaic, where Bridge is featured in the UMass archives of this being a public health strategy to center the voices of underrepresented individuals. So now I'm ready. Dominic for the next slide. When Dominic invited me about inclusive democracy, I'm like, what's that? So I looked it up and I did some research, and it really did resonate with the work, and framing Bridge in this way was pretty easy. But I found this political, economic, social, and ecological decision-making framework that creates inclusive democracy. And I just want to say that is Bridge in that 360-degree solution. That is what we work on. Another effort that the Collective Leadership Institute and Dominica participated in has been the Inclusive Leadership Cohort for Social Change. And this is where, again, Amália's talk was very inspiring to me. But in this Inclusive Leadership Cohort, we gathered our community foundation, our corporate financial institutions, our lead employers, and our cultural sector, because that's a major economic driver in our region. And we gathered them together, a board member and an ED, so that we could create strategies of inclusion and equity that would advance efforts of uplifting the underserved population's needs and addressing them. So right now, 2.5 years later, there's a pay equity initiative across the county, and that all institutions that participated and a larger group are all addressing pay equity as a county. And also we have created other strategies to engage underrepresented voices and boards and many other efforts. So the inclusive leadership cohort is where we put our energy now into training. And then Bridge itself is a learning organization. We believe in empowerment through education. So even if someone has lived an experience, we like to give the education around that so that they can move and take some of the blame or responsibility off of themselves or their communities, and put it into the places where it belongs, which is systemic barriers and oppression, and begin to activate and empower themselves and their communities. Dominic is also supporting our staff in collective leadership training, and we're nearing the end of that, and it's been a really inspiring experience for our team. And the educational side, the mindsets, this I heard in the opening talk, really addressing the mindsets. In our country, we're talking about anti-racism and race equity, but the decolonizing of mindsets is extremely important. And many of you may have heard of this term, kyriarchy, which is a feminist term talking about the multiple systems of oppression and how they intersect and how they keep people repressed and oppressed. And so what Bridge does is educate around that, whether it's in institutions or in community, so that people, again, see that these are systemic issues that can be dismantled and rebuilt, and they certainly need to be disrupted. So that's part of the education that we do. And then again, like I talked about earlier, the historical truth and repairing erasure that's happened in our country around oppression. And the last piece I showed you also pictures about, which is our grassroots movement building. And again, that used to just happen in community kind of by night, but because of the pandemic, we were really able to start that inclusive leadership cohort and bring our institutions into the movement building work. And I'm really proud of that. And one of the things our organization talks about very clearly is, again, what Amália said, that the solutions live within the community and they're different depending on the communities that we're speaking to. So we call that being culturally specific. And we have culturally specific strategies for housing, for healing, and for food security. So that's a little bit about what that slide's about. Next slide. Yeah. So when I'm thinking about narrative, I was thinking about how I coach and train about shifting the narrative, and how Bridge, to me, is a living example of that. As a co-founder, my organization, I hope, is leading by example as well as coaching and training. So again, I'm going to keep repeating, center the underrepresented individuals so they can achieve agency and self-determination, not only in their workplace, but also at home and in their communities. This idea of capitalism productivity is a real driver in the US. In many places, I'm sure it is around the world. And I really want to supplant that with heart and humanity. And so thinking about decentralizing, all of our systems so that communities are taking care of themselves. So there's relationship and there's cultural specificity. And another thing that I'm proud of in the Berkshires is we have our own local currency. And our Dr. W.B. Du Bois is on the 5 Berkshire bill, which you'll see at the end on the picture. But having local currency and local economy is really important in supporting community and having culturally specific strategies. The systemic analysis that I talk about and train to and we lead in our organization with is really having a practice of consistently slowing down to break apart when you're developing a program, when you're developing an initiative, to look at it on the individual, interpersonal, cultural, and systemic lens. And that means on the individual level, what biases do we bring to the table? What information are we individually lacking to be successful? And then interpersonally, on an institutional level, it's what partnerships do we have? Who are we in partnership with? Who are we listening to? And then as an individual, who do I have relationships with? Because to be successful working across identity and across communities, you need to be in deep relationship. So those are important questions to ask as you begin an initiative or you begin to think about saving our planet together. And culturally, a lot of the times we're talking about white supremacy, that dominant narrative that the US needs to talk about so we can dismantle. But in any area, what are the cultural norms that are accepted, that are creating the narrative, or creating the lens in which we address issues? Again, Amália's talk in the sector of philanthropy is a real good example of this. What are the driving norms, and how do we shift them to really be culturally specific to the communities that we say we want to serve? And then systemically beginning to identify the barriers, the policies and procedures and practices that keep people in place, right? Begin to really identify those systems of oppression. And again, I mentioned earlier addressing mental models. And the first thing that any group needs to do is know why you're doing the work. And that why will shift over time. As you learn, as you develop relationship, continually revisiting the why. And each of us have our own individual why, and then there are also organizational whys. These things, again, are what create the narrative. And then developing readiness for change work. The system is designed to replicate itself, whether any of us are here or not. So having the fortitude in an institution and the resilience in an institution to hold change work is really important. And individuals that can lead that work are really important to have in place and have them resourced. And then you also need to develop the tools for values alignment. So establish what values are shared and how you remain values aligned as you go through this work. And my best advice there is to lead with curiosity. And the last piece I've already talked about is support education and training ongoing, whether it's coaching, consulting, developing your own cultural literacy. These are all very important tools. And the next slide, please. And the metrics, again, I really appreciate the opening today, and I hope that this serves as kind of a support to that. But being able to determine what positive change and impact looks like is really important. So I was trained in results-based accountability. I don't know if many of you know that model, but that's really an important framework. What results are we seeking? How will we know if we're successful? And how do we then hold ourselves accountable to the change we're seeking? One of the important questions in that is who's engaged in designing the work? And as you've heard me say now 6 times, center the underrepresented communities and individuals, right? And when you're looking at if you've been successful, are we reaching these change metrics? Has the narrative shifted? Are we listening to different voices? Are different people contributing to the story? Have we shifted from a deficit to a strength mindset? Are we shifting from a scarcity to an abundant mindset? And this next one, to redistribute wealth and resources. Again, I've mentioned reparations on the small and large scale are really important to me as an individual and also to our organization. And ways to do that are investing in women and communities of color and organizations, institutions led by them, investing the time in relationship building, reallocating wealth, and also think about what other resources need to get reallocated. It's not just wealth. Our attention is one. Where do we need to put our attention? And earmark resources and allocate time and care. Again, steward healthy communities. We look at one of the biggest results in social impact you can see is eliminating poverty, that people aren't doing without, right? That we aren't looking the other way from certain communities, that there's healthy outcomes for all and improved quality of life for everyone. And make humanity the currency that is the dominant currency. The tagline we've developed as we're in our 15th year is Bridge is a love story. And that narrative came from our constituents, from our participants. They were the ones that describe us as a love story. And then one of the things that I think is really important that I carry with my positive psychology training is appreciate the process in the journey. And all of us will make mistakes. All of us will learn that we've been a part of the problem, and to embrace that and learn and bring that forward into your next time. So the metrics to me you need numbers and you need stories, but this is to me the how, like how you get to these metrics and how you decide what those metrics will be. And then next slide, please. And here's just a picture again of our community. Just last night, I was honored for the second time in 2010 and now in 2023 by the immigrant community in our area. We can't afford as African Americans and the immigrant community to be separate. So last night, I as an individual and Bridge as an organization celebrated with about 200 immigrants in our county, thanking us for providing them the pathways to be leaders and be successful and take care of their communities. What else do I want to say? This is just an example. We also are really aligned with gender issues. And so we have a new grant that's supporting Black communities and specifically Black trans women in our area. And yeah, there's the picture of the Berkshires with Du Bois on it. I'm holding a big blow up copy of that. But we really encourage people to try and develop a local currency and to think about decentralizing systems. And that's a way to disrupt them, is when you empower communities to take care of themselves. And I think that's it. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much, Gwendolyn, for this input. You're seeing the appreciations coming in from participants. Bridge as a love story was clear on that last slide, the community that you've built around Bridge and that you've tapped into. I think there was a lot of resonance with Amália's presentations, with solutions coming from communities. You're also making narratives visible with that first slide, or literally saying W.E.B. Du Bois is from here, Elizabeth Freeman is from here. Let's embrace these narratives as a community, rewriting histories, repairing erasure, decolonizing hierarchies. These are powerful words and powerful work that you're doing. The focus on the Berkshires made me think too in terms of patterns and cultures of collaboration, of dialogue, that we're looking for those kinds of patterns in a multiplicity of places around the world. And yours is a beautiful example that you're working on there. I wrote down humanity is the currency, care. We're allocating care around metrics. What do we care about? Enough to measure. So thanks for these inputs. Let's see if people have questions of Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn, in our Q&A, you might need to scroll down a bit. Wissam from Egypt is interested in your community engagement sort of approaches. So how do you learn about the needs of the communities and the aspirations of the communities? Maybe you could say a word or two about that.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time in community. We have set meetings. So an immigrant women's group has been meeting for 14 years every Thursday night. So some of these women have been there for all the 14 years. Some have come and gone, and we continually bring people in. So we're constantly hearing the needs and providing resources and welcoming people in. So that's one way. We also hold a racial justice meeting on a community level the first Thursday of every month. And that's been happening since 2016 when we had the unfortunate presidential leadership. So that's been happening. And then for 14 years, we've also had a racial justice group in partnership with the Department of Justice. And that has been meeting the first Monday of every month. So we in the way we allocate our time at Bridge, we are with community. And what we say about any consulting and coaching, it's community informed. And again, our board has consistently been, I don't like the term minority because we're people of the global majority, but as for the state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're designated as 51% women run and 51% minority run since 2010, maybe right after we were founded. And most recently, we're recognized in the last year through federal funding streams as culturally specific organizations. So again, for us, by us. So Bridge operates in partnership with the community, and we've remained values aligned. And I hope that helps. I'm not sure. When people want to ask, sometimes people just want to get to diversity in our area because we're in a predominantly white area. And we often, Bridge flips that question around. Okay, we'll facilitate developing relationship. That's one of the programs Dominic participated in. They wanted to know, why aren't Black folks and brown folks participating in climate work? And I'm like, well, what relationships do you have? How have you heard what the needs are? Maybe they are, maybe you don't know. And so when so then Bridge facilitated training and conversations and forums, and then we got to the work that they wanted us to do with them. And that's then where all these other solutions came out that have now rendered the Solidarity Farm and Garden, the Meeting House, the shelter, and lots of wisdom coming from the immigrant community that have come from climates all around the world that actually have strategies for climate change for New England. So that was a really big learning, right, for our municipality, that the wisdom was living within the groups that they were thinking they needed to fix.
That's really profound, that the wisdom was already living in the groups. I feel like that also echoes parts of what Amália was talking about for us and by us. That relationship building, maybe to round this off, Gwendolyn, and we'll need to move to the next speakers. Relationship building over the 14-year history of Bridge, that goes beyond any project timeline, any project budget,
any grant,
ongoing, any grant. And I think that's a key message for many of us in this conference, to say it's not going to just happen through projects that are funded for a finite amount of time. This is a relational level at which you're working to achieve transformation in the Berkshires. So again, thank you so much for having contributed. Stick around, please, for the
Thank you.
We'll get
Thank
to
you
that
for all the
moment.
beautiful comments. Thank you.
Wow, amazing. All right, let's move. Thank you, Gwendolyn. You're seeing some of the applause coming for you. Let's move into our final input. We're going to go now to Kenya, where we have two ladies from Our Blue Future will be presenting. And yes, you're right. This is an all-lady cast today on the first day of our TLC. So Carol Mutiso is someone that I have the pleasure of working with on a week-to-week basis. She is project officer with the Western Indian Ocean Governance Initiative. This is WIOGI, and she works with GIZ, the German Development Cooperation there in Kenya. She, along with Doreen Simiyu, I'll share her title in a moment, will be presenting on Enlivening Our Blue Future, the transformation network for a sustainable blue economy in the Western Indian Ocean. Doreen Simiyu is network coordinator with SWAIO Tuna. That's the Southwest Indian Ocean Tuna Forum. And SWAIO Tuna is one of the members of Our Blue Future. So together, Carol and Doreen wish to make an input from their respective perspectives in the secretariat for this initiative on Carol's side, and in the preliminary steering body from Doreen's side. Doreen is in a remote location, so we might have her video initially, but if she has to turn it off, we understand, Doreen. I'll share your slides for you, and Carol, I think you're kicking things off. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Dominic, and good afternoon from Nairobi. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of this conference. I'll give a little context about Our Blue Future before I hand over to Doreen, who is one of our members for the initiative. Next slide, please. So Our Blue Future is a multi-stakeholder initiative that has been set up. It's been developed in the Western Indian Ocean region. This region, when we talk about the Western Indian Ocean, we are looking at 10 countries. We are public, private, civil society alliance, and we are trying to foster a diverse network of impact-oriented partnerships, projects, and champions across the region. So in the spirit of co-creation and inclusivity, we are governed by an unhierarchical kind of structure. On top, you can see there's the regional aspect where we have the secretariats, as mentioned by Dominic. It's currently hosted by GIZ, the organization that I work for. And then we do have a preliminary steering team, the area on the left, where we have different members. Currently, we have 22 partners, and Soya Tuna is one of the partners. Then we have task teams. We have task team 1 and 2. Task team 1 being in charge of the architecture of the initiative, and the second task team being on communication and outreach. Then below that, we are looking at the innovation teams. These are teams that are sort of steering change on the ground. We are looking at different blue economy sectors being represented here. Currently, we have the circular economy, we have blue tourism, and we have community livelihoods. And as you can see, the circles there, there are different blue economy thematic areas. The vision is to eventually transition to a transformation network of projects and partnerships within the region. And like I said, this is something that we are developing, and that is one of the aspirations that we have for this initiative. And on the far left, we have the Nairobi Convention Conference of Parties. This initiative was sort of endorsed to be developed during the 10th Conference of Parties at the Nairobi Convention. That was in 2021. And I want to hand over to Doreen so that she can talk about Soya Tuna and how they are contributing to the OBF, our Blue Futures narrative, to a sustainable blue economy. Doreen, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and quickly just introducing what Swayatuna is all about. And Swayatuna is Southwest Indian Ocean Tuna Forum. And we are a regional civil society platform. And our objective is to collectively contribute to sustainable development and management of marine and fisheries resources, with tuna being our flagship species. So we have members from Kenya, from Tanzania, from Mozambique, from Madagascar, from Comoros. And our membership is quite diverse. We have the community and small-scale fisheries representatives. We have the private sector, and we have the media as being part of the network and other civil society organizations. And our objectives is twofold. The first one is to empower communities so that they can effectively engage in and contribute to sustainable management of marine and fisheries resources. And secondly, is policy advocacy and engagement. And our approach is that we want the communities to know the law, we want the communities to use the law to protect, to claim and assert their rights. And we also want the communities to know how to shape the law. So I'm just going to share our experience as Swayatuna. And one of the things that I wanted to share is about taking community-based approach to sustainable blue economy. In our case, is very important. It's very key, because if we want to get sustainability of our results, if we're talking about collective action, we need to put the community at the center of designing community-based solutions. All the programs and projects that we are doing in terms of sustainable blue economy, the community must be at the forefront of it. In our case, we do this a lot when we are engaging in ecosystem restorative measures, where we work with the communities. When we are doing fisheries work, we work with the community. And the importance of this is that at the end of the day, we want buy-in, we want the community to appreciate what we are doing, and we want the buy-in. And so if we are not putting them at the center of designing our programs, might end up with impractical projects or programs that are not even relevant to the context of the community. Then secondly, maybe if you can move to the second slide. The second thing that we wanted to share with this in this meeting is providing local communities with necessary tools and resources. And this has to happen across the whole value chain. So for instance, we'll give a capacity building sessions to the communities, and we'll want them to take action. But we do not provide them with the necessary tools or the necessary resources for them to actualize on the skills and knowledge that they've gained. And so for us, we provide skills and knowledge to our members, but we also expose them through experiential visits. And we also give them the tools and resources. So if you look around, for instance, in the fisheries and marine sector, the information that is there is very technical, and most community members cannot consume it. So what we do is that we simplify these documents, we translate them and share with our members. And we recognize that as a regional platform, we have many languages, and we try to be sensitive to this so that when we are producing these materials, we translate them in our context, we translate them to Kiswahili, we translate to Portuguese, and we translate to French, so that the communities can read, understand, and take action. Other than this, we also provide different toolkits that the communities can use when doing their work. And we also try to link them to different resource providers that can support them in whatever they're doing. Because what we are currently doing is just like, I can say, startup capital, but we try to link them up to different resource providers across the value chain that can support the communities to continue with the initiative that they are doing on ecosystem restoration and on blue economy. So here, just a picture showing, the other slide was about giving them the skills and knowledge through capacity building sessions, but we go further and try to support them with some of the equipments that they can use for their work. So just in this line of thought, for this case, we'll train on fish handling and hygiene. We'll provide them with the resources that can actualize this in terms of value chain, fisheries value chain, value addition equipment, and cold chain facilities. And we'll also give them a manual so that they have the knowledge, they have the resources or the equipment, but they also have something to guide them. When they're going back to their constituents, they can use it to pass the same to the other members of their network. And so we are saying capacity building and training programs, yes, we acknowledge that they are very essential, but from our experience, we've learned that this has to go along with giving the communities the tools and resources that they need to achieve their resources, to achieve their objectives. And therefore, if we want to transition to a sustainable blue economy, we need investment, that is finance. We need technical resources. And we also need capital resources. And most importantly, what we've seen lacking in most of the communities that we work with is financial literacy. And that is something that we are working on, and also call other partners to join hands in providing financial literacy to the communities that we work with. And most importantly, linking them to financial institutions or credit services or credit facilities. Next, please. Then thirdly, we're talking about creating an enabling policy environment. We have so many laws that guide the sector, but the question is, are the communities aware of these laws, of these policies, of these regulations, of these standards? Do they know how to use these laws through innovative approaches? For example, legal empowerment approach. Do they know how to use these laws to protect or to claim or to assert their, say, human and social rights? Then lastly, do they know how to shape the law to their advantage? So that is the three key areas that we are working on. And just to mention that if you look across the region, many of the countries for the past, say, 5 years, they've been developing their marine fisheries policies or the tuna management strategies. So what we've done as a network, we've involved the communities when analyzing these policies and giving our opinion or our concerns to different policymakers in the form of a policy brief, so that we're not just doing, say, policy review for the sake of it or from our perspective, but we try to capture the needs, we try to capture the aspirations of the communities, so that when these policies and legal frameworks are being developed, the voice of the community is embedded in them. And also to mention from our work, what we've learned is that the level of compliance will increase when the input of the local communities is reflected in the policy and legal instruments. Because at the end of the day, we want enforcement, we want compliance. But if we do not involve the communities in formulating or in reviewing these policies, then we'll have a challenge when it comes to compliance and enforcement. Next slide, please. The last thing we wanted to share is that building strategic partnerships and effective stakeholder engagement is really key. And we think this is fundamental for the successful implementation and even scaling up of blue economy initiatives. I mentioned earlier that one thing that we need to do is how can we link the work that we are doing with communities to financial institutions. So there's work still that we need to do on engaging financial institutions or credit facilities that can tap into the work that the communities are doing. Then we also learned that there's need to align and develop synergies that are important to ensure that we optimally use our resources and avoid duplication. And that is the whole essence of OBF. That is the whole essence of Soyo-Tuna. We don't need to work in circles or scattered voices. There's need for us to align our work so that with the resources that we have, we optimally use them. Then we avoid duplication, because what we've learned in our interaction with the communities, there's a lot of the same thing happening with different partners, and we end up confusing the communities that we represent. So there's really need to create synergies. And the last point is about just supporting the local communities and linking them, just providing linkages, exposing them, because as CSOs from where we sit, we have many opportunities. We have many linkages. We need to expose the communities. We need to support them. We need to link them to different resource providers that will support their work. And I just wanted to share a few case studies of what we've done here. And the last picture here is about an engagement meeting that we did with the Seychelles Fishing Authority. And we're advancing the work of transparency in fisheries. How, as CSOs in the region, can we address issues of transparency? Because we have issues with access to information, access to data, and we know that transparency directly relates to good governance. So that is the partnership that we are trying to work out with the Seychelles organization. Then on our top left, some time back, we were doing a training on human rights for fishers. And we acknowledge that we are not the experts in this field. So we built this partnership with an organization called Mission to Seamen and International Transport Federation that are very key in the space of human rights for fishers. And they were able to come and take us through what human right for fishers means. Then the picture top right is about our engagement that we've done in the region with the governments. The engagement that we've done at regional level with Indian Ocean Tuna Commission. And as we speak, we are observers to IOTC, and we've participated in several meetings whereby we've collected the voice of the communities and presented that at IOTC level. So that is a kind of strategic partnership and effective engagement that we do, which we think is very important in blue economy discussion. And I think that's the last one. Yeah, just to mention that as Soyo-Tuna, we are part of OBF. I think Carol talked about that. And in fact, we sit at some of the operational structures of OBF. We call that task team. Yeah. Thank you. And I'll take it back to Carol to continue with this discussion.
Thanks a lot, Doreen. Then I will finish off very quickly at what exactly we are looking at, because our aspiration is to grow this initiative to become very solid and in a very participatory manner. So in the first phase, we are looking, we are, as you can see, there is exploring and engaging, where we sort of have the preliminary governance kind of arrangements. And this is where now we have the preliminary steering team with the 22 members being represented in the initiative. And we are slowly moving to an interim sort of governance structure, where we are currently clarifying the common goals, resources, planning the future together and all that, with the vision being to ultimately have like a permanent governance structure for the initiative. Then, as just to build on what on the previous slide that Doreen was talking about, strategic partnerships and all that, as we are slowly discussing what the initiative could eventually achieve in the Western Indian Ocean region, we are in agreement that we want to be that collective voice for advocacy. As you can hear that the communities, they want that part of the discussion in Blue Economy Matters. We have that role of also sort of matchmaking between the new opportunities, projects, and bringing all these partners together for that collective impact at the end. Next slide, please, so that I can discuss about what we are looking at in terms of measuring our impacts. We are looking at this collective leadership campus is what we are using for the initiative. And for the purpose and clarity, what we've been asking ourselves as we go along is if the members are supporting this narrative, and in what ways can they contribute to the impact strategy that we are putting together. Then for this, what I want to emphasize is that we are co-creating a joint implementation strategy, because we feel that it's very important for all partners that are involved, communities involved as well, because as Soyotuna is giving a good example of an organization that is bringing in the voice of the community. They have to be part of this vision and trying to shape how the implementation of the initiative will be like. There's also the discussion of co-creating the governance arrangements. As I mentioned, we are slowly moving from the preliminary kind of structure of the initiative to an interim one. And this discussion is happening with the involvement of all the partners. And we also take cognizance of the issue of inclusivity. I mentioned we are covering 10 countries, and we have to make sure that we have the stakeholder groups being represented here. Soyotuna is talking about community representation, and I have to also highlight the other stakeholder groups that we are talking about, that these are the governments, there's a private sector, there are the non-governmental organizations in the region, and so on. So when we look at the current preliminary steering team, or what we call PST in short, we are trying to have each stakeholder group having like a representative sitting at this steering team. Then for the purposes of accountability, which is very key for everybody who is involved, we have monthly meetings for different levels for the preliminary steering team, the task teams, and the PST, they hold the secretariat to account to report on progress of different activities, especially for our jointly developed work plan for the initiative. And there is also the accountability from the members aspect, where they are transparent in terms of bringing together existing projects for that strategic networked action. Something that I also emphasized when I was beginning to elaborate a little bit on the collective voice for advocacy that we are trying to push for the Western Indian Ocean region. So I think that's the end of our presentation. I hand it over back to you, Dominic. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carol and Doreen, for this input. So the focus with Soyotuna on fisheries, the challenge of managing a common pool resource is enormous. Trying to figure out how to share those resources such that coastal communities can thrive, and so that the oceans can also thrive. Carol, the complexity of a 10-country transformation network, I really appreciate the efforts that have been made to make that multi-stakeholder. in terms of the steering bodies and the task teams and the innovation teams and so on. I'm going to jump right into a question for each of you so that we can then also move to the panel. For you, Doreen, if I could ask about one of the participants was asking about how do you encourage leadership at the community level? How do you encourage leadership at the community level? And then we'll go after that to Carol. Could you respond to this question about growth versus degrowth? So this idea when we're talking about a sustainable blue economy, perhaps we're promoting growth in certain sectors across the Western Indian Ocean. As a planet, this participant is pointing out that degrowth is needed overall. So how do you balance that tension in the Western Indian Ocean in terms of promoting a sustainable blue economy? Doreen, could you go ahead first, please? Catherine, I think we need to have Doreen spotlighted, please.
I'm kind of coming 1 minute.
Maybe Carol, we could go to you first on this sustainable blue economy. Could you describe it and how it focuses on growth versus degrowth, or both?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I understand that dynamic. That on one hand is the issue of trying to sort of not push or preach about sustainable blue economy, conservation of marine resources and all that. And then on the other hand is the economic part of it, because at the end of the day, communities around the coast, especially coastal communities, they depend on those resources for their livelihoods. So as part of OBF, what we are trying to do is to look at the UNFFI Blue Economy Principles, so that we can build a narrative around what exactly can work in the Western Indian Ocean region, so that communities can use the resources, but at the end of the day, we also need to conserve the marine resources. Yeah, so that's what I can say about that.
And Doreen, from your side on promoting community level leadership, you comment on that, please. Doreen, I know your internet connection is rather weak. If you prefer to turn your video off, that's okay. We had a question from a participant on how OBF and Swayotuna promote community level leadership.
Dominique, I guess she actually wrote to me instead of you. She cannot hear anything because it just says it's raining cats and dogs here. So write the questions in the chat. That's what she says. Somehow she sent it to me instead of you.
I see. Okay. All right. Then in that case, I think we could probably take this question up. Maybe it'll come up as part of the panel. I'm just aware that our time is running out slowly. So again, thank you, Carol and Doreen, for your input on our blue future. I think we need to switch to the panel where it would be great to have all of our speakers back up here. And Douglas, I can support you with the poll. My colleague Douglas Williamson will be moderating the panel. So let's bring him out here on stage. There he is now.
Hi. Yes. So that was fascinating to listen to everybody and your different inputs. I hear so strongly, about there's this patchwork approach to sustainability, which is this sort of beautiful quilt or pattern, multifaceted pattern of sustainability approaches. What I do here as a kind of a through thread is really empowering people who are as close to their challenges as possible to make their own solutions. And that's something that at Collective Leadership, we think that is an integral part of transformation literacy. We had originally envisioned that we would have a little bit more time for the following sessions or the little following session. What I would like to do, because we had this great input from 3 different projects or 3 different initiatives, I should say rather 3 different initiatives or movements. And what I would like to do now is to sort of open it up back again for the participants with a preliminary Slido poll once again regarding what are the challenges still regarding today's transformations, enablers, and topics. So we're going to ask you to go into the Slido poll. If you don't want to write something, just pay attention. But if you do really sense a challenge, please try and type it in about a minute. And then for everybody else, you have the opportunity to upvote things. So we're going to try and sort of upvote the different challenges that you articulate. And then we'll try and ask one of the panelists or 2 of the panelists to quickly reflect on the sort of most popular challenge that we together are going to generate right now. So if you can pop into Slido, again, the link is in the chat box, and type in if you have a challenge you want to hear discussed in a very brief, but also just pay attention and vote if you feel like a challenge is really important or the most important. So you can upvote the challenges recorded in Slido. So please head over to Slido and type your question. The question is, what entrenched challenges do you still see in using narratives and metrics for advancing inclusive democracy and good governance? Entrenched challenges for using narrative and metrics. So please type in a question if you have it. And then once we start to have questions, we can have little votes on them as well. I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I imagine you're all thinking hard. I will be quiet for a moment. Institutional biases. Okay, that's great. And I also just want to pop back into the question and answer, because I think some of the questions in there are relatively useful. And maybe if one of my colleagues could pull out some questions from the question and answer box for this as well. That's great. So we're starting to get some questions here. How do we deal with the dominant narratives of capitalist economic models, institutional biases? How do we ensure donor flexibility? How do you prevent politicians from controlling or veering narratives towards vested economic interests? So, yes. All right, I'm starting to see something emerge of the 4 questions. And I'm just going to give another 30 seconds to a minute just to look at these, maybe these 4, or if somebody types in another one, a late entry into the race, the popularity race for interesting questions. Here we go. Oh, looks like we've got 2, donor flexibility for emerging community needs. That's a great question. How do we deal with the dominant narratives of capitalist economic models? Very, very strong questions. How do we deal with institutional biases? All right, I'm going to call it just because in the interest of time. And I think, Dominic, let's just ask this question. How do we ensure, or maybe not necessarily ensure, but increase the probability of donor flexibility to work with emerging community needs? I feel like this is a question which Amália could best approach to beginning. And I see her smiling there. How do we increase this probability of donor flexibility regarding emergent community needs? And maybe I'll pass it to you first, and then maybe I'll pass it over to Gwendolyn, who I think would probably have a thought on this as well. Amália, over to you first.
Well, this is the question of my last 35 years. I think it's actually producing what we are, telling the right stories that finally catch some ears. But it's from the inside out. So really the field is so consolidated. There are some hard beliefs there about the efficiency of the North as opposed to the South. And that actually demonstrates in how they choose the funding that they provide, and how it's easier for big funders also to fund big organizations because they're more used to managing a lot of money, and the big funders really can't give small grants. And so creating in the last 20 years is not enough yet, but it has been enough to produce this, this tipping, some more, let's see, heavier evidence that there's something in the horizon that they've been paying attention. And the more we produce, that's why narrative and metrics and producing evidence is so important to us in the Global South, because it's the only way to actually grab ears. But then, really, I think the way to change is the partners who come on board, who understand, it becomes so clear to them. Usually the big funders, like CLUA, for example, the Climate and Land Use Alliance, they understand. So it's about them and some of these partners, some big funders who understand what we're trying to do. And then they are the ones who really have the best chance to influence the field. So it's not an easy process, but it has to start somewhere. So it's like you have to be focused, and you have to be trying, and you have to be producing also other kinds of ways of explaining, other approaches, other forms of narratives that now involve bioeconomy, that involves, renewable energy is really, really, really important in places that need to be preserved. But look at the same mindset being applied to this as well, that is now producing social unrest and social prejudice, because it's done with the same mind frame of the huge capitalist system. So there are so many places that we actually need to influence. Well, I don't have the answer. I just have some of the elements and producing this. And that's why we created this alliance. And I would love, this alliance is just, the beginning, the beginning of something much greater. We really want to talk to a lot more groups, organizations, environmental, approaches, and see how we don't need to be in the same boat. We need to be talking about the same thing. And I think it's aligning our narrative as well, is knowing each other and knowing how we see the world and how we go together. Because I think it's in the numbers that we're going to do something about this.
Thank you. Muito obrigado, Amália. That was, I think you've really touched on the point there. How do we amplify these stories of success that you're having that really are highlighting things that should transform the way we think about how can we help these places to help themselves to develop in the way that they want to develop. So it's really, I think, integral work that you're doing in order to transform a system which has a way of operating which is not reflective of the real needs on the ground. And Gwendolyn, could I pass that question over to you for a brief answer?
Yeah, I'll try to go as quick as I can. And again, like Amália, I have an example. And out of that inclusive leadership cohort, I mentioned the community foundation locally participates. And each organization had to come up with their internal work as well as the cross-sector projects. So the community foundation decided to start a new fund advised by leaders of color in the region and then serving organizations that serve. And my role was to get leaders of color together and do the research, find out what they needed, what would be the parameters of this. And one of the outcomes of that was an anti-racist donor learning circle. So we ran a 12-hour course that any philanthropist that wanted to participate in this equity initiative that was going to be led by folks of color, which is something people haven't ever seen, they had to participate in this learning circle. So we did the first 12 hours. Now those 12 hours, the donors were educated. We did the values work and a lot of things Amália talked about. And then we brought together the leaders of color and the donors, and we've been facilitating conversations. And really, for the first time, a donor saying, okay, when I look at this application, I was really trained in endowments, and we're talking about the urgent needs of our community as a Black and Brown community. And we facilitated dialogue that has never been done, right? And really dealing with the power dynamics, the hierarchy, and then having those conversations. And it's not easy work, but I think that intentional slowdown of bringing donors in intentionally to these efforts is very important. So that's the short as I could get it. Sorry.
Thanks, Gwendolyn. No, I think that's a fascinating idea. Educating the donor population. That is, I think, a really strong idea. So I want to commend you on that as well. I feel like we don't have enough time to hear all the great work that everybody is doing. I sort of regret to have to move on because we are getting so short on time. I feel like we're going to have to wrap it up. Dominic, would you share the final slides? And first of all, I want to thank everybody for attending today, especially our speakers, Amália, Gwendolyn, Carol, and Doreen. Thank you so much for being with us and for sharing these very, very powerful experiences that you have had in narrative work and in metric work in moving towards real transformation in these great challenges. I do want to announce something which is really special for CLI, is that we are announcing a Transformative Partnership Award. This is the launch. You're here for us launching a Transformative Partnership Award. This is going to be an annual award for projects and initiatives worldwide that drive transformative change through a multi-stakeholder approach and contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. The prizes are going to be partially financial, but also training in our certification program. Applications are now open. Of course, you will hear about it if you heard about the TLC, the Transformation Literacy Conference. I'm sure you're going to hear more about the Collective Leadership Transformative Partnership Award. This is really exciting. We really hope to spotlight projects and initiatives such as yours. So please consider applying yourselves. We would be happy to support any of the work that you're doing. Thanks so much for all of you. With that, could you just slip to the next slide, Dominic? Thanks. So big thank you to everybody. As I said at the beginning of the session, right when we started in our welcome, we do have 2 more sessions. We're going to be focused in our next session. You're going to have to remind me because I've lost the thread here. Our next session is on Wednesday. It's going to be at the exact same time, and we're going to be focusing on 2 more of our transformation enablers. As well, on Friday, we're going to have a 3rd and final session. I believe our final session, oh my goodness, I've totally lost it. But we have 2 more sessions to go. Same time. You have the same access through our event portal on Zoom. And so next message, innovation and regulations and governance and structures on Friday. So please, if you can, come back and attend some more of these sessions. Today was really inspirational in our speakers, our conversation, the questions, the engagement with everybody is fantastic. So please return. It's going to continue to be as engaging and as inspirational as today, I am absolutely sure. So on that note, I believe it's time to close down the session for today. We are right on time at 10 o'clock. Thanks to my co-facilitators, Elizabeth and Dominic, to our background work from Martin and Katrin from our team, to our speakers, Doreen, Carol, Gwendolyn, and Amália. Very much appreciate you spending your time and energy with us to have these really important conversations at this crossroads in history of life on planet Earth. Thank you so much, and looking forward to working with you in the future. Please continue your great work.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Great.